Hey, thank you all for joining us today for the webinar Navigating Minnesota's Cannabis Industry, hosted by Morem Waller. Today, you will be hearing from several individuals about this topic. First, you'll be hearing from Blunt Strategies, led by Layli Fatehi. Blunt Strategies is Minnesota's first and only full-service strategic consultancy dedicated to the cannabis industry. They were a driving force behind Minnesota is Ready, the successful campaign to legalize adult use cannabis in Minnesota, and the architects of the Minnesota model, recognized as the most innovative and forward-looking in the nation. Next, you'll be hearing from Point 7 Group, led by Ashley Pachola. Point 7 is an award-winning 100% women-owned consulting firm dedicated entirely to the cannabis industry. Next, you'll be hearing from Morem Waller, led by Mark Waller and Betsy Morem. As a licensed CPA firm, Morem Waller is a full partner uniquely qualified to support cannabis, CBD, and hemp companies from beginning to end. It takes a whole lot more than just filing your taxes, which is why Morem Waller assembled a stellar staff who can support all the essential work necessary to create and sustain a financially sound company. Next, you'll be hearing from Budding Operations, led by Ali Piscatelli. Budding Operations was founded in 2015 and focuses on operational and inventory compliance as it integrates with your business's workflow. Service offerings include on-site auditing, employee training, SOP development, inspection preparation, and violation mitigation. And after that, you'll be hearing from Happy Gnome HR, led by Alexandra Ruby. Happy Gnome HR specializes in tailoring human resource solutions exclusively for cannabis businesses across the United States. From recruiting to retirement and onboarding to offboarding, Happy Gnome HR understands the unique needs of the cannabis industry. Our presentation today will cover a variety of topics. We'll start with an update on the Minnesota Office of Cannabis Management and Regulation presented by Blunt Strategies. Then we'll move on to tips for a successful application presented by Point 7, followed by when to start accounting, banking, and fundraising presented by Morem Waller. After that, we'll hear about what to expect when preparing for regulators and compliance by Budding Operations. And finally, we'll have a presentation on hiring and creating a culture for your cannabis business by Happy Gnome HR. Please put any questions you have in the chat and we will cover them at the end. And after the presentation, we will send out a recording and the slides for everybody to have. So we'll kick it off with Blunt Strategies and Layli.
Thank you, Katie. So I'm going to run folks through a quick overview of where we are with the Office of Cannabis Management as well as with rulemaking. So in terms of the status of the Office of Cannabis Management right now, that office is in its implementation phase, and it will be in that implementation phase kind of throughout the rulemaking process until it is fully staffed and takes effect. It looks like, they're using March of 2025 as the date for when it'll be fully operational as a standalone office. I put up there a link for the state's cannabis website. You can sign up for email updates on the implementation process of the Office of Cannabis Management, including updates whenever they're making new hires or when they are engaged in public engagement rulemaking. Currently, we still don't have a director for the Office of Cannabis Management. That search is ongoing, and I think they're being real targeted to make sure that they are identifying somebody that has the requisite set of skills to carry this new office through the rulemaking process. But they have made several key hires, including Chief of Staff, Katie Knudsen. She comes from the Department of Public Safety, where she was Chief of Staff. They also recently hired a Chief Regulatory Officer by the name of Max Zappia. He's also someone experienced in Minnesota state government, especially with a background in banking regulation. And then they have hired some public engagement and outreach people, as well as some policy analysts as well. You'll recall that the legislation also created a cannabis advisory council that had 40 some odd seats on it. They are in the process right now, the governor's office, of finalizing the appointments for that cannabis advisory council. So while the Office of Cannabis Management is being implemented, regulatory authority for the low dose products that are currently legal rests temporarily in the Department of Health with the Office of Medical Cannabis, and it will be moving over to OCM March 1st, 2025, unless some of us have something to say about it and it happens sooner. Next slide, please. So the biggest kind of thing that we're all waiting on is for the Office of Cannabis Management to carry out the considerable amount of rulemaking that it needs to do between now and the end of 2024. So right now, the timeline that OCM is on is to complete rulemaking by Q4 of 2024, which would allow for the application window to open at that point, and then for licenses to be awarded Q1 of 2025. This is an expedited timeline. They're using what's called expedited rulemaking authority. Rulemaking of this scope usually takes quite a bit of time, but I've put up here the OCM's own slide that walks through sort of the timeline for that rulemaking. They've already started, and I'll cover this on my next slide a bit, beginning to solicit some input and feedback from the general public and from stakeholders. And then the real formal part of the rulemaking process will be in 2024. Next slide. So as you can see, rulemaking is going to cover a lot of very critical subject matters that are relevant to even the preparation of one's licensing application. There are a lot of details as to the license types, the procedures, some of the requirements, et cetera, that the legislation kicked over to rulemaking, as well as a lot of the both infrastructure and operational requirements, especially around manufacturing and retail. And then all of the details of things about, testing and packaging, labeling, these kinds of things. These are going to be decided as part of rulemaking. So this is why we really encourage folks to do subscribe to those updates from the Office of Cannabis Management, so that as they are taking up these topics, you are following and providing your input or tracking the conversation as appropriate. Right now, the Office of Cannabis Management is soliciting comments and survey responses on a variety of subjects that they will be covering as part of rulemaking. So they had a first survey that focused on cultivation. The window for that closed, I think about a week ago. Right now, and I put December 24th, that's a typo, my apologies. It should be December 14th, so it's tomorrow. Is the window for providing survey responses on issues pertaining to testing, environmental controls, fertilizers and pesticides. Then at the end of December, middle to end of December, it'll be a focus on the operations of retail businesses, facility and handling matters, as well as what the complaint process will look like for local governments. Then they'll move on to packaging and labeling, as well as tracking, inventory, and verification. And then the real meaty stuff, January 13th through 26th, that's when they start looking at licensing and social equity considerations. Obviously, these surveys that they framed out right now don't cover the totality of issues that they will need to take up as part of rulemaking. One thing that I imagine is going to require considerable deliberation is going to be cannabinoid regulations. We'll see where that pops up. And with that, I will turn it over to my friend Ashley from Point 7.
Sorry, it took me a second on the video. Thank you, Lily. It's nice to meet everybody. I'm happy to be here today. Just to start, the things that I'm, I guess, kind of sharing with you are designed to address some of the questions that we've been getting from teams preparing for the application and for the licensing process. So these tips and tricks, if you will, stem from working in this space for almost 10 years. And supporting groups all over the country, 37 states, I think, at this point, through competitive licensing processes. So I'm happy to share some of our, advice with you and things that have proven to be successful for others. But the first thing that I want to address head on is one of the number one questions that we're asked at this stage, which is, what should we be preparing for in terms of an application? And I think my best advice to you is to recognize that no one knows what this application will look like. There could be a word count, there could be a page count. It could turn into a lottery like we're seeing in New York, where you're asked to upload some paperwork and answer yes or no questions. But the reality is what you do know now is there's a business to operate on the other side of that. And there are very practical things that you can be doing to prepare for that operation. So my best advice is we're talking through this is to think about what does a successful operation look like for the license type that you're pursuing, and how can you best prepare for that? And that way, when the application does come out, you're taking the months or year of work that you've done, and you're simply converting that information into whatever format the state is going to require. But again, lots of preparation that goes into this, and I'd caution you against trying to think too much about what exactly they're going to look for. Some states want an enormous amount of information. Others keep things very simple. But the reality is we do know how to operate these license types, and there's a lot that you can be doing to prepare. So this slide really kind of outlines the 5 core pillars of a successful submission, but also a successful business. Again, wanting to emphasize that, yes, we want to see our clients and our friends and colleagues get through the licensing process successfully. But more importantly than that, we want to see them run successful, viable, profitable businesses on the other side. So real estate is part 1. We'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide, but this really encompasses the decisions that you'll make surrounding your location. And hand in hand with that is your community engagement plan. I can't emphasize how important this is enough. We've had clients over the years ask us to sort of create their community engagement plans, which we usually will not do for them. We want you to take the time to get to know these areas before you commit to real estate within them. We've had clients at different junctures try to move into a community that simply doesn't want them there. And whether or not they're allowed to be there, it's better, it's healthier for the business in a lot of cases to be, where you're wanted and to work in partnership with the community to help dispel some of the myths and, concerns that communities have. So taking the time to listen, understand where they're coming from, think about, the pain points communities are considering is really important and a great foundational step to take in terms of building that strategy. The next one is your team. So when I think about team, I think about owners and full-time members of the team, but also contractors, suppliers, vendors that are going to help you through this. In my experience, the most successful teams are composed of local, knowledgeable professionals, usually with experience running a similar business or a business in general, coupled with consultants or professionals that have worked within the regulated cannabis space. I do believe people can be successful applying for licenses and building these businesses without heavy input from consultants, but I will caution you that the learning curve is quite steep in the beginning. So making sure that you have people on your team that understand how this works and how the business functions will ultimately set your ownership team up for greater success and likely help you prepare a stronger application. The next piece is the actual application, as we've been talking about. And of course, this has to be compelling. It needs to tell your story. It needs to be technically written, incorporating the things that you'll actually do when you're running the business. But I like to remind people that, again, this is a culminating event. Your application is, the thing that you'll assemble probably last, but that cannot be the first time that you start thinking about the operation itself. it's really important that by the time you sit down and put pen to paper, so to speak, in developing the application, that you've already thought through the hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions that go into running that business. And that way, when you do sit down to develop the application, whether it's a 300-word limit or 50 pages, you'll have a really clear sense about what you're talking about and what you're trying to convey. The knowledge will be there. And now it's a matter of formatting that knowledge into whatever required format the state establishes or the office establishes. And the last are strong financials, which we'll talk about on the next slide as well. If there's one thing that all teams considering applications or applying or licensure can do now, it's start to dig into the financials. A strong pro forma will not only help you understand what's reasonable for your license type in terms of performance, but it can really help guide your decision making over the next several months. And will also help you understand your budget, because between now and submission, as Lily said, we don't exactly know how much time we have. And so for many of us that are small businesses, perhaps social equity applying entities, I recognize we need to stretch our budgets as much as we can to get through this process. And so seeing what costs go into not only the preparation, but the preparation post-licensure, the build-out costs, et cetera, will help you start thinking about what's feasible. And it may also help you understand some of the myths of the cannabis industry. Just a secret, we're not all rolling around in millions of dollars of cash. It takes a lot of work to get there. And it is not often what people believe it to be. And those financials would really help you to understand that. Next slide, please. So we'll talk through these quickly, but the first thing I want to say here is that the planning and preparation process is not linear. So what I mean by that is there's decisions that you can make now that may seem a little bit out of order, but they're things that you can do, get done, prepare, and sort of put on a shelf, knowing that you'll absolutely need them. And there's other decisions that we really need to wait on because we don't have enough information to make them yet. So the first comment here is understanding one-way door and two-way door decisions. I think this is an Amazon principle, but in either way, it's the core of what this means is one-way door decisions are decisions that are very hard to unravel or take back. The greatest example here is, in my opinion, is related to real estate. Once you've purchased a property or you've signed a binding lease, et cetera, it's very, very difficult sometimes to roll that back. So you can start the process of looking and examining, but until we have parameters, just be very mindful of making decisions of this nature and of this scale. The second is doing your homework. There are a lot of wonderful human beings in cannabis. Many of them are among us here today. There's also a lot of bad actors in cannabis that have been consulting after 11 minutes of working in the industry. So minimum of 3 references, ask to speak with past clients, do your homework. Consultants are not made equally, and there are a lot of people with knowledge that you probably don't want. So do your homework. That also applies to other suppliers and vendors, whether it's construction, legal, lobbying, anyone that you're engaging with. Really do your homework, ask questions, and be patient with that process. There's some really great talent among us, like I said, but not all made equally. So do your homework. The next piece, as we hit on previously, is the pro forma. Again, I think this is the smartest thing to invest time and energy into now. A lot of the groups that we talk to have very unrealistic expectations of these license types, especially in the short term. Without knowing how many licenses we're looking at per type or per category, it's really difficult to understand potential market share, which obviously impacts, your bottom line and what you can expect to earn in this kind of an industry. So invest, if you were to do anything now, spend the time there, because it will definitely pay off and it'll help to inform not only how you use your budget and your time, but whether or not this is a space that you want to be in at this juncture. It is very, very competitive. It's very fun, but it is competitive. And I think it's important to be realistic with people about, what we see in this space in terms of performance. And again, the last piece, as I mentioned, writing the application, that's really, your last kind of step. But between now and then, I mean, writing out your job description, starting to document your procedures, and thinking about a lot of the general business decisions that you would be thinking about in any industry. Those are payroll decisions, employee benefits, technology systems that you want to use. All of the things that you would need if you opened any business also apply here. And I can't tell you how often groups get so focused on the application that they're rushing through those decisions with weeks or a month left before submission. So there are things that you can start with now. And also, in my experience, having those conversations with your partners, especially as it relates to community engagement, philanthropy, and how you intend to treat your employees, those conversations can be very powerful in terms of understanding if you and your business partners share the same values and share the same alignment in terms of how you want to run the company that you're starting. So those are some of my pro tips, and I look forward to answering any questions that might come up.
Thanks, Ashley. That was wonderful. My name is Mark Waller, and I'll dive into alongside Betsy, who I'm sitting next to, and I'll turn the camera over to. But we want to talk about when to start accounting, banking, and fundraising. So it's a great segue talking about the application phase, and especially talking about when businesses, and especially in the cannabis industry, but really in any industry, need to start thinking about accounting. Just to back up, as in our role when we work with cannabis clients and really any type of business, we really feel strongly that accounting and financial reporting is the most accurate way to track your business from day one. And it's just such an important piece of understanding what's happening in your business that you really need to think about it as a language of how you're doing, how you're tracking your business, how you're tracking your financials, how to track your cash flow, et cetera. So just from the very basis of the idea that accounting is the number one way to track how you're doing it as a business, that's extremely important to think about in the cannabis business. One thing that we often get in our position is that there's a misunderstanding among many people that accounting doesn't really need to be done until you've opened your doors, or that accounting or federal state tax filing doesn't need to be done until you've started opening your business. That is not true. When you receive your EIN letter, the IRS gives you a letter that says, congratulations, you've received an EIN. Here is your tax form that is due on this date. So as soon as you get that letter, the clock has really begun on your requirement to file federal and state tax returns for your business. You also need to think about, like Ashley was saying, you need to think about everything that has to do with your pro forma and how you are putting your financial model together. So that means startup costs, the cost of consulting, the cost of equipment purchases. If you have investors that are going to be asking for reports on how you're spending investor money, you need to be able to track all of those items. If you are contributing your own personal capital into the business, you need to have all of that in mind. And one of the biggest hurdles we run into is when businesses have to catch up on all of that work. It becomes very costly for the business owner. It becomes a headache immediately for the practitioner, and it just immediately puts you behind. So being ready for audits, such as if the IRS is going to audit you, or if the bank needs an audited financial statement, it means that you should be tracking all of these items from day one, which is all to lead to answer the initial question of when should you start thinking about accounting. You really need to start thinking about it as soon as you begin your business. So even before you start operating, you should have an accountant on your team. You should be thinking about how you're going to be tracking your items. You should be thinking ahead about what are the material items that you need to consider keeping track of as you go through operating your business, so that you have all of that information ready and on hand at any given time. Because as you go through the application process, you're going to be incurring costs. You're going to be needing to track all of those items while you go through the application process. So long story short, you need to start from day one. I'm going to turn it over to Betsy here.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be touching briefly on banking and fundraising in the cannabis space. As we all know, banking is difficult. We have not yet passed the Safe Banking Act. So banking options in this industry are currently very limited. As of right now, you would not be able to walk into a large national bank and open up a cannabis bank account. With that being said, there will be banks who have a cannabis banking program. Perhaps different credit unions in the state, for example, will participate. But with that, will come higher banking fees, longer onboarding process, and perhaps some additional compliance requirements throughout that relationship with the bank. In fact, some banks might be looking for some sort of pro forma so that they can understand the viability of your business. So not only is just establishing a bank account more difficult, but financing your business is not going to be, you're not going to be able to finance your business through traditional means that are available to most other businesses, such as SBA loans, even loans from the bank itself. So many of you are going to have to raise capital. So as Ashley mentioned earlier, one of the things that you want to be putting together immediately is that pro forma. And you or someone else on your team will want to have a really good understanding of how all the numbers on that, how you arrived to all the numbers on that pro forma. Because as an investor, they're going to want to not only see that pro forma, but also have confidence in those numbers and confidence that you have, financial literacy. So you definitely want to be starting to look for banking options now and start thinking about, start putting that pro forma together, understand how much money you're going to need to raise, and just make sure that it's very buttoned up so that you can have productive meetings with potential investors.
We'll turn it over to Allie to talk about what to expect when preparing for regulators and compliance.
All right, thanks, guys. So I wanted to first, you can go to the next slide if you'd like. I wanted to first just briefly mention, because Blunt Strategies did a great job of explaining how to get involved in rulemaking at this time, but I want to reiterate how important this is. So definitely make sure you're signed up for the notifications, and definitely make sure that you're engaging in this rulemaking process in a way that you're comfortable with. A lot of these topics that they have put out in the surveys at this time, and that will be part of final rulemaking, will directly affect your business plan as well as your projected financials. For example, there could be odor mitigation requirements that you're obviously going to have to obtain and pay for. They will also have restrictions on what types of pesticides and fertilizers you're allowed to use. So all of those things go into how you're developing your business. So making sure that you're keeping up on that, even though we are, a year out from submitting these applications, those rules will directly affect how you're going to run your business. It's also really important to build relationships with not only the OCM, but the local municipality that you intend to operate in. It's important to have a point person for communications with governing bodies, and you really want to establish clear lines of communication, right? Although these people are regulating you, you want to be transparent with them and establish a good relationship as soon as you can. Now, you might be not given a specific contact at these municipalities at this time, but keeping that in mind is important. And if you don't intend to have a designated compliance officer, which often doesn't happen in some of these smaller businesses, determining if it's going to be an owner or a general manager, and hopefully someone with experience in the cannabis space if possible. It is important to have contacts, like I mentioned, outside of the OCM. So your local municipality will have their own set of rules. They're most likely not as complex as will come from the state, but it's important to be aware of what these are. An example might be that they have different operational times for dispensaries than the state does that you would have to then operate within. So making sure that you're not leaving the local research out of this application process. Locally as well, you're going to be dealing with planning and zoning boards, building permits. Sometimes you have to get a special use permit. So making sure that you're digging into local municipalities that you are interested in is also as equally important in this process. So the next item I had on here, I think we have to go back one slide. Sorry, 1 second. Is thinking about standard operating procedure development. So after we get close to submitting an application, or you have submitted a strong and possibly awarded application, the next step is to turn all of this information, all of this narrative that we've turned in, into a reality. Often these applications are, in-depth paragraphs that we then need to turn into digestible step-by-step standard operating procedures or work instructions so that your staff and management knows what is required of them on a daily basis and when they're doing certain processes and procedures at the facility. There's 3 areas to consider when you're creating standard operating procedures, or 3 big ones. I'm sure there's more. So what did you submit in your application? Responses and promises, right? What you submit to the state is what you're saying you're going to do. So making sure that that is in the front of your mind when you're creating these operating procedures, as well as state and local regulations. And then also any third-party programs that you've brought on. This could be a point of sale. If you're a dispensary, it will definitely include the state-required seed-to-sale tracking program. But this also includes things like marketing tools. Are you using weed maps? All of these things have their own functionality that you want to make sure is brought into your standard operating procedures. And this would even include things like your accounting software. SOPs are a large part of employee training programs. Some SOPs, such as what is cannabis waste and how do I manage it, you might train every employee on. And then there's going to be some very job-specific SOPs that are direct to roles and job descriptions. SOPs are living documents, and this means that you are always updating them, always reviewing them, and making sure that they're not just written and put in a drawer somewhere. Next slide, please. So inspections are inevitable. In the final rules and regulations, they might provide a frequency of these inspections, but both the OCM and your local municipality reserve the right to inspect your facility at any time. And you should also be expecting inspections from people like the fire department, especially if you're doing extraction, food and safety, if you're working with edibles. So it's not only the OCM is really the message there. And it's also unclear if there will be an operational inspection required. We see this a lot in newer states to cannabis, where you're given what we consider a provisional license, and then the OCM would come out and inspect your facility prior to giving you permission to have cannabis on site. These inspections are intended to verify that you're executing what you promised in your application, that you understand the regulations, and that you've built out a compliant facility, including security systems, required tracking logs, signage, things like that. So this is really not only a visible inspection, but also making sure that you've done everything you said you were going to do and are required to do. A big part about being prepared for an inspection is record keeping and organization. And record keeping organization should start now. If you're scrambling around to find something, it sort of triggers them to be looking for something else. So making sure that you know where you're going to store your documents, making sure the appropriate people have access to these records, establishing a naming convention for version control is super important. And records are usually a large chunk of inspections. This might be something they even request from you through an email. And if you can produce these quickly and accurately, it really helps move those sorts of inspections along faster. My last little topic here before I pass it off to Alexandra is how to mitigate issues that might arise during inspections. So it's really important from the beginning of your business and the beginning of onboarding employees, and this is a good segue into Alexandra as well, is building a culture of compliance, right? Everybody who is involved in your business needs to be held to the same standard and expectation, including owners, right? So it's very important that everybody understands compliance, receives compliance training, and that we're monitoring that compliance is being achieved on a daily basis. It is important to document all of your employee training. This is something that could help if you received a violation and saying, we have trained all of these employees, we are going to retrain them. So having that documentation is really important, and also offering ongoing and reoccurring employee training. Training doesn't stop right when you're hired, for example. And I also suggest doing internal compliance audits, especially on a quarterly basis when you start your business. If you are verifying that everything is compliant, when those inspectors come, you have nothing to worry about, right? You know that you have everything in order and it doesn't become a panicked situation. So being as prepared as possible for inspections and compliance and regulations is the best way to move forward there. So I'll pass that off to Alexandra now.
Hello, everyone. I am just waiting for my video to turn on here. Katie, if you could check on that. There we go. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here today. Happy to be talking to you about hiring and creating a culture for your cannabis business. I'm with Happy Gnome HR as the founder and operator, and I'm excited to dive into this today. So please, yep, there we go. So today, I'd like to dive into really what does it take to become the golden standard for as an employer in Minnesota from the get-go. So I know we're talking kind of way back here when you're, licensing application. Of course, a wonderful time to begin thinking about hiring. Of course, your initial team usually comes from proximity or people that you know that are great operators or great in finance or whatever those types of things might be. People that are, of course, interested in cannabis. But I'd like to emphasize the importance, as a few of my colleagues have here, on that cannabis knowledge and background. And because it really is a different animal at the end of the day, and you have to have that buy-in from those individuals because it's a marathon, not a sprint. And just with the ups and downs and all of the obstacles that you'll encounter, you need a team that is really strong in their convictions to be part of the cannabis industry, to get through the stigmas and things that will come up as you grow your business. But the team aspect of things and the hiring aspect of becoming that golden standard also begins with investing in HR. So having some type of HR support, somebody who can make sure that you're compliant in terms of your employee handbooks, your policies, your procedures, even from the get-go. And a lot of times with licensing and application, they want to know what your policies and procedures might be. What your training protocols might be, how you're going to do ongoing training, how you're going to stay compliant, things like that. And then I also want to talk about, which I'll dive into in the next couple slides, what does it look like once you're operating, going above and beyond to have a good retention program and to have a solid staff that allows you to really emphasize your employer brand, to have a solid talent acquisition strategy. And let's see here. So if you could go to the next slide. Let's see here. So why is the cannabis industry an interesting niche market to hire in? I think beginning with regulation and compliance, you really need to have a staff that is going to support you in ensuring compliance day in and day out and from day one. That's how you're going to protect your business when you're not there. That's how you're going to know that when you step out of the door, that people are going to hold the rest of the employees and themselves to the highest level of ethics and adherence to those regulations, which is first and foremost, you got to protect the business. And then you need to also look for people that are able to tackle the stigma of cannabis while they're out, having coffee, out grocery shopping, when they get, approached, because we're trying to spread the knowledge that cannabis use under, regulation and, medical rec is safe, and that I guess that they can be out there as educators themselves and trusted sources of information. Which also allows other people to say, hey, maybe I want to, get involved in the cannabis industry. Maybe I would make a great employee, and maybe I can make a career out of this. And then, of course, specialized skills. You're looking for people that understand that there's uniqueness in marketing, uniqueness in, roles like compliance and regulation. Those are some of the specialized skills that go into cannabis. Growing, of course, growing and, being in the lab, things like that. There's, of course, it's, using kitchens, which is universal, but they're using cannabis is definitely a more specialized skill. So, and what comes up with this is that you may need to start considering relocation fees, your geography, the fact that there is a smaller talent pool in a state like Minnesota because it is a newer state. And so you may need to factor in your budget that there are relocation fees to have quality and top talent. Of course, you want to hire for diverse skill sets. Diversity brings creativity. Diversity gives life to innovation and allows you to have a more complete sample, I guess, of different ideas and ways to do things. And that always leads to a more productive group. Social responsibility kind of goes a little bit with tackling stigma, but also just the ethics in cannabis use while people are out and about. Are they ethical individuals that can represent your brand, or are they, not following compliance and regulation and law in Minnesota, such as smoking joints on the street, or using cannabis against illegally. Being market savvy, having people that understand market trends and new and innovative products that are on the market. What are customers and your community looking for in their cannabis products and in your brand, and from one neighborhood to the next, because that changes. Something that might be really successful up north Minnesota might be very different than what's successful in Minneapolis. So an entrepreneurial mindset is really, really important. It kind of goes with adaptability and staying on your toes and looking out for the business's best interest. One thing I have seen in the last, decade of being involved is that there are a lot of go-getters, people that want to grow within the industry and someday want to open their own facility or retail shop. So I from what I've gathered, having a more entrepreneurial mindset in your employees allows them to look out for your business as well and come up with creative solutions. Cultural fit is, of course, huge. Just the last couple years, or while we've begun to get involved in Minnesota, there's that really fun, there's tons of fun Minnesota brands and things like that. But it does range, just like I said, from different areas of Minnesota. So finding the right people for your brand, finding people that are going to represent your brand and give it life, while they're, not at work, which also contributes to a great talent acquisition strategy as well. So, and then networking, finding individuals that are going to go and be your biggest advocates. They're going to, while they're out at a music show, or while they're, like I said, at the grocery store, they're going to be, talking about the brand, excited about it, and getting people coming into your doors. So thinking about things like that is big. And then just, like I said, knowing that the talent pool in Minnesota is small. So finding those people that are really going to go out there and be your voice. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, hiring and creating a successful culture. So culture is really huge, and that's where HR can kind of come into play, or having really great GMs or operations managers. these are the people that are really going to set the tone. It's top to bottom, but diversity is going to be really big, especially as you open your doors. You want to create a culture where people are going to be open-minded. I think, let me see here. I'm just gonna, sorry, my screen just went out a little bit. Okay. So let's see. Sorry, guys. So learning specific skills here, such as having a GM that is strong in creating diversity, is really who people are going to look to. So they're setting the example for the rest of your staff. And we live in a generation in a world where diversity is really important, and it should be. Fostering an environment of continuous learning is also going to be really, really important, because training is one of the things that I think the industry needs most. From California to New York, we see that there's a lot of managers who evolved in their roles, or were just placed into management roles that have gone without training, or were just placed there because they were the first person that was in the room. So really keeping training at the forefront is going to create a very successful culture for your group. Let's see here. So wellness first. This is a great way for you to prioritize your employees and make them feel that they are part of something that they want to be. They want to be there for years to come. And that's one of the things we see most as well, is really high turnover in cannabis. And so putting your employees first, having ongoing training, having days where they can take mental health breaks, things like that, are really going to help you to create a better retention program. And I can see, with a lot of our clients, an emphasis on retention has reduced many of their labor costs in terms of turnover. So hiring, time, resources that goes into turnover is a massive loss on the balance sheet and P&L. So keep that in mind. Let's see here, open communication. So one thing that I feel our most successful clients have done is fostering a transparent culture. So top to bottom, letting your employees know how the business is doing. Of course, you don't need to tell them, exact numbers, but maybe trends, and letting them know whether it was a good sales month or a poor sales month. Hosting one-on-one and company meetings to shed light on the success or improvements that can be made in the business. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So the impacts of a positive company culture. When you have happy employees, they're going to be more productive and committed to your company. And having a stable staff, like I mentioned, you're going to have a better retention strategy and less turnover. And as I had mentioned also, the associated hiring costs, which become pretty exorbitant if you don't focus on stability. Innovation is massive, especially in a new market. You need to be the ones setting the trends, and the ones that are inspiring your employees to share ideas. Sometimes they're the ones who come up with the best because they're at the forefront. If you're in retail, they're dealing with the customers. And then team harmony. Positive cultures improve teamwork and collaboration. So having your team really, teamwork, team building, hosting community and team building events outside of work is a really great way to do this. Happy customers. So engaged employees are going to provide better customer service, and really, if they're forward facing. If they're not forward facing, this is going to come back to your employer brand, and having people, while they're out and about, not at work, really giving life to your brand and shedding light on, what a great company you are. Another piece here is just being a talent magnet. Talent strategy, especially in a new market, is going to be massive. You're going to want to get the attention of the best people out there, the people who are most excited about being in the cannabis industry, the people who are willing to give it their all. Those, you really want to keep your eye out for that and ensure that you're being compliant, that you have things like benefits and perks, and that you're paying a competitive wage or above that of your competitors. And then, of course, good reputation. Having a good reputation in the cannabis industry and setting the tone for those around you, I think, is one of the best things that you can do. A lot of people don't want you to, don't want to be first to market because you can fall on the sword for others, and it's a great way to kind of, expose yourself and what you're doing. But I would say that it's a great thing to do, to be a trendsetter, to be someone who is setting the tone for compliance and care for adherence to the law, and then also for creating exciting brands, something that's unique to you, something that's unique to your community, something you're very passionate about when it comes to brand, really thinking that through. So overall, a positive culture is going to boost business performance. It's going to boost your revenue, your profits, and enhance your overall employer brand, which is really what we're going for here. And so, anyways, that is really what I would say when it comes to hiring and company culture. It sometimes is put on the back burner because you're thinking about things, of course, like operations, finance, compliance, but your people are your business. And so just to keep that in mind, just as much as the others, it's a pillar of success. And that's all I have for everyone today. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. And thank you from all our presenters. That was such valuable information. We have a few questions in the chat, and kind of last minute here, if you have any other questions, type them up and I'll get them out to the group. The first question will be for Allie from Budding Operations. It was a question about standard operating procedures. Were they needed when you submit your application? And if not, do they just need general standard operating procedures with your application and a more detailed version after the licensing? Or what is the how should it work with standard operating procedures and your licensing?
Yeah, and I wish I could give you a permanent answer here, but at this juncture, we should be prepared for both. I'm sure, as Ashley can speak to, we've seen very elaborate applications that do require your standard operating procedures, or what they call them usually plans, which would still need to be adapted into training material when you're operational, necessary when you turn in your application. And other times, like we're seeing in New York right now, we're expecting they're going to ask for those things if you're awarded the application. So basically, there's no way around it. It's just going to be when it's due. And unfortunately, we don't know that at this time. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in there.
Thank you, Allie. Next question I would like to direct to Ashley from Point 7. What do you feel Minnesota has done well so far from the lessons learned from other states?
Oh, sorry. Trying to block that light behind me. I mean, one of the first things was the rapid correction made regarding the director of the OCM. I think, having worked all over the place, I can tell you that these programs do not succeed unless they're developed and guided by professionals that truly understand the space and take the time to examine other markets. I think, as someone mentioned earlier, I think it might have been Alexandra, that it's not always a first mover advantage in cannabis, and that applies for governments as well. There's an enormous opportunity to learn, for better or worse, what states have mastered or not. And I think without proper leadership, that's really difficult. So I think the rapid correction there was definitely telling in terms of the state's ability to take feedback and kind of get that right. And I'm happy that a lot of patience is going into the revised process. And it sounds like there's a lot of questions coming from individuals that have been involved in the development of this program in terms of outreach and looking to people who have knowledge about other markets. That, based on my interactions to date, has felt very genuine. So verdict's out, but it definitely feels like there's an enormous amount of care here and interest in learning and being informed.
Thank you, Ashley. Is there anyone else? If no one else wants to jump in on that, we'll move on to the next question. If Laylee could answer this next question for us, from Blunt Strategies. If a current business has been issued a warning for inappropriate behavior, how will that impact the likelihood of future licensing decisions?
So it depends a bit on what the inappropriate or non-compliant behavior was, but in general, if you are operating in good faith and you are, they send out an inspector or something like that, and they identify something non-compliant, the interest of the regulators right now is to see that you respond by bringing yourself into compliance and staying there. Especially right now where there's a lot of ambiguity as to the regulations. A lot of times the inspectors that they're sending out, we're seeing, don't always have the same information. And so they're giving conflicting info to different people. If that happens, stay calm, call the department, and, work with their folks. They are not trying to punish you. They really are in a phase right now of trying to develop relationships, help people come into compliance. That said, if, the issue is that you're selling something grossly non-compliant that you should know is non-compliant, absolutely, that's going to have an issue. That's going to be an issue when it comes time for licensing. Your local government has the ability to provide input into your licensing application, and they're not going to want a business that has a track record of consistently ignoring regulations and requirements. So do your best to be compliant where there's ambiguity, seek input, and if they ask you to correct something, do it.
Thank you so much. This next question is for Alexandra from Happy Gnome HR. Would getting a group training from the Minnesota Cannabis College for Retail training be recommended before opening?
Absolutely. I would say that any training that you can take in preparation of opening a location or retail, any type of cannabis business is a positive thing. I don't know about this program specifically, if any of my colleagues want to chime in, but I imagine that if it's done in a professional manner as this, that it's probably quality. But I would say any training is good training.
Thanks. Mark, did you want to add something?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add, in particular with Minnesota Cannabis College, from what I've seen, they have wonderful materials. And I totally agree with Alexandra. Any prior knowledge or training you can do now is absolutely better than the alternative. So I would definitely recommend that as well.
Great. Thank you both. This final question that I have is for Ali from Budding Operations once again. Is it possible to get approved for a license before having a property lease in hand?
Again, I'm not sure if that is going to be required. We've seen a variety of those types of applications, whether you apply and you don't have a facility, or a actual lease, or an ownership of the property would almost never be required, but you might be required to have an executed lease or permission from the property owner to conduct cannabis at that site. I would say, even though I can't tell you definitively, that it's possible they give priority to people who have obtained a property already to operate in. Their goal is to get these licenses out and get people operating. So if there's things holding you back from achieving that, they could possibly put priority towards people who have obtained a license, but unfortunately, I don't know. And maybe somebody else knows more information, but I don't think we know right now.
We do not know right now. That'll be a matter that's settled as a part of rulemaking. What we know from the work we did with policymakers and the conversations we're having with regulators, there is, especially because what we've done in Minnesota is create an ecosystem that's supposed to be supportive of smaller scale businesses. This will be a topic of conversation, how to perhaps allow provisional licensing or, things like that so that folks are able to secure their property contingent on getting the license.
Thank you so much, Allie and Laylee, for helping answer that question. I haven't seen any other questions pop up in the chat, and we're a little bit over time, so we will say goodbye at this point. Thank you so much to everybody who has joined us today, and thank you so much to all of the speakers. It was such an informative session. We'll be sending out the recording soon, and the contact information for all of our presenters is on the screen now. You can always reach out to me at hello@moremwaller.cpa if you missed some information or you wanted to contact somebody and you didn't get this written down. Thank you so much, and y'all have a good day.